Under Jesse Marsch, Leeds have only won 6 out of 23 Premier League games. Now, 2 of those games came last season against teams that eventually got relegated. 2 of those games came last season against teams who had 10 players or fewer on the pitch, and 2 came this season against teams who then went on to sack their managers. So this is clearly not a good rate of return for Jesse Marsch, and the big question is, why is it not working for him in the Premier League? On the board in front of me, I've got Leeds as they've generally set up under Jesse Marsch, and I think the best thing to do is to divide it into different sections. So you have the back line here in this section, you then have this double pivot here, and then we have this forward unit, which essentially I like to think of as a pressing unit. It's got 4 players in it here. It's set up in a 4-2-3-1 in this instance, but you can have lots of flexibility here. Sometimes you might see the 2 strikers together and then 2 narrower wide players, and these players can interchange quite a lot as well. So you can sometimes see Harrison on the right, Aronson on the left, and vice versa, and Sinisterra has also played on the left as well. But this is the way that they like to set up. Now, the thing to remember about Jesse Marsch teams is that they're quite different to other teams in the Premier League. Most of the other teams in the Premier League, when they have possession of the ball, are going to try and use that possession to generate chances, and the way they'll do that is by holding possession, maintaining it for as long as possible, usually building it up from the back, getting into a situation where they can force the opposition into their own half, and then use their possession to get the ball into dangerous areas, try and find their striker who can then score. So they're using possession in particular to try and generate chances. It's very different for Leeds because Leeds aren't necessarily looking to control possession to generate chances. They're looking to do something quite different. They are looking to get the ball into dangerous areas, create chaotic moments, and then benefit from those chaotic moments. So it's not necessarily about possessing the ball in order to create. It can be about possessing the ball in order to lose the ball to then create. So Leeds will try and possess the ball at the back. You cannot deny that fact, but in terms of what they're trying to do with this possession is they're trying to be very direct through the central spaces, get the ball forward as quickly as possible into those dangerous areas. And so what we'll see is Leeds passing the ball along the back line in order to generate these sorts of situations where they pull the opposition players forward in these sorts of situations, and they're going to try and generate space at the back that they can then exploit through a few attacking moves. So in this situation, what you'll see is the back line playing the ball around, trying to move this forward out of the way, and what they're going to try and do is move the ball into a sort of situation like this where there's a clear path through to one of the wide forwards, maybe Harrison in this instance. So once this pass has been made possible, you'll see the centre-back play that pass, and what's going to happen is a bounce pass almost immediately. So Harrison is going to play the ball back into Rocker's feet, and Rocker then is going to play an almost immediate pass into this central space here. Now, by doing so, they've generated space here that can then be exploited in 2 different ways. So let's say the ball ends up with Sinisterra. You've generated a situation now where you've got the ball quickly forward, the opposition are pushed forward, you've got lots of space to exploit, and what we're going to start seeing now is the opposition starting to do what I like to call backwards defending. So you're going to get everyone running back here, you're already starting to generate chaos. Now what you could do is you could try and generate a chance directly immediately, so Sinisterra could play the ball, try and get Bamford to run through quickly into this space. Often what happens though is because Leeds are playing so direct, the move will break down. So one of these defenders may step up, take the ball off Sinisterra, and now Leeds have lost possession. But rather than using this as a situation for Leeds to fall back and defend, they're going to use this as an excuse to attack. And this is why Marsch likes to use really narrow formations. So if we draw 2 lines here, just from one edge of the penalty box to the other, often in these situations you'll see Leeds in a really narrow configuration. The only 2 players outside of this central band in the middle are these wide fullbacks. And the reason for that is when you're trying to generate dangerous chances through pressing, counter-pressing as we call it, it's better to have all of your players in a central area. So if the ball's lost here, these players can fall on the ball, win it back, and now because this player has stepped out to win the ball for the opposition, there is that space in behind again to attack. So the idea then is one of these players can win the ball, play the ball through, and again you've generated a dangerous attacking moment. So Leeds are possessing the ball in order to get it forward quickly into those really dangerous areas, and if they lose possession, they use that as an attacking force as well. Now, out of possession, the principles are the same. You're using those out of possession moments in order to generate these dangerous chances. So let's take a look at that. So in this instance, we've got a back 4 building up, and Leeds are actually quite passive in their high press. So what they'll do is they'll have their 2 forwards, or the 9 and the 10, locating themselves on the opposition pivot player. So they'll sit here, they'll stop this player from getting the ball, and they'll be happy for these 2 centre-backs to just play the ball to one another. Now these 2 wider players are going to sit and wait for the ball coming into the fullback, and that is going to be the trigger for the press. And the general principle is, what Leeds are trying to do is they're trying to split the pitch in 2, depending on where the opposition play. If they choose to go on this side, they're going to try and force everyone against the touchline here, spring a pressing trap, win the ball back, and then generate a chance through that chaos, and vice versa on the other side. So let's imagine that the ball is on the right here, it's played to the fullback, and this is a trigger for, firstly, the striker, Pat Bamford in this instance, to do a bending run. If I can get the bending run to run. He's going to come in here, he's going to block off the centre-back, the pass back to the centre-back, he's going to stand in here to make it really tricky for this player to be able to release the pressure here. And what we'll see then is Harrison following that trigger, pressing up on here, and then across the field, everyone else is going to be moving. So Rocco will push up here onto this player. Sinister is already on the pivot, but he will make it very hard for this pivot to be able to pick the ball up. If the wide player here drops in, you're going to see Pascal Struijk pushing in across here, and then all of the Leeds players now are going to move across on this side of the pitch to make it as small as possible. And the general principle is that you make it hard for them to move the ball onto the other side of the pitch, so it doesn't really matter if you leave players free there. Now, obviously, if the opposition team try and build up, they can do it in different ways. They could maybe try and play this pass through to the pivot, but their pivot is already under pressure. And even if the pivot does get it under control, then these players here are all under pressure as well. And so what Leeds are doing is, when the opposition are trying to build up, use possession, they're going to try and make it as difficult as possible. And in the end, hopefully just have the ball played down the line into this situation where the centre-backs are going to win the ball back comfortably, play it back to the keeper, and then Leeds can start their in-possession phase. Do the same thing again, try and get the ball forward into these dangerous areas where they can counter-press, cause problems, and score goals. And this approach is actually working fairly well for Leeds, but there is a problem. It's only working fairly well against the big sides that they might not be expected to beat. Against the sides around them in the table, towards the bottom half of the table, they're struggling a lot more. So let's take a look at why that is the case. So let's go back to the situation where the opposition are trying to build up out the back and they are having problems caused to them. We've already said that what happens is that Leeds are happy allowing these two players to be able to play the ball between themselves, and then as soon as they play that pass to the fullback, that triggers the really aggressive press and it can cause lots of problems. And that's what happened to Chelsea and Arsenal. So Chelsea and Arsenal are two teams who are looking to generate chances, as we've said, through possession, and Leeds were able to stop them from doing that, generate their own chances through those counter pressures, and in the case of Chelsea, beat them 3-0. But what we're seeing this season is that some teams are refusing to engage in that kind of game. And the general idea then is that, well, if Leeds' best attacking threat is through these counter-pressing moments, why don't we just bypass the press altogether? So let's imagine that these two centre-backs passing the ball between themselves, they know that if they play the ball to this fullback, that's going to trigger a press. So what about if, in this instance, they just simply bypass the press altogether? So they get two players up here, player to player against the two centre-backs. The two full-backs are pushed up because they have to watch out for these two players in the event of a press. Let's say this centre-back just plays the ball over the top here. What he's done here is just entirely cut out that pressing unit. That's the unit that Leeds use in order to generate problems. Play it over the top and automatically you're now 2v2 against the centre-backs. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. The first one is from Brighton playing against Leeds. Brighton had Graham Potter as the manager at this time, and as we know, Graham Potter is a really good reactive manager. He's able to look at what teams are doing and make life hard for them. So in this instance, we've got Brighton and Hove Albion in possession of the ball. They're playing this way down the field, and we've got Leeds' double pivot here and their pressing attacking unit here. That's the four players that we saw on the board before. The left back has got the ball, and rather than engaging in the press here, what he's going to do is just play the ball immediately high into these two players who become isolated against the two centre-backs. The two full-backs, as we've said, have had to push up because they have to be ready to jump when that press is sprung. And so you end up now with this situation where it's 2v2, the press has not been able to do anything, and as a result, Brighton are able to get the ball down into a dangerous situation under control on this side of the field. Now, because Leeds are a counter-pressing side, they're very aggressive in the defensive moments as well. So you can see here all of the Leeds players pulling across. Just Pascal Struijk, who's playing left back, he's on the same line as the penalty spot. So all of the Leeds players pretty much on this side of the pitch. We've got two players here in acres of space, and lo and behold, the ball is found over here in that acre of space and the goal is scored. I've got another example of that. So this is against Brentford. Again, Thomas Frank, another smart manager, a manager who is able to recognise weaknesses in opposition play styles and exploit them. Ben Mee is the centre-back here. Here's Leeds' pressing unit. Here's the double pivot. Ben Mee sees that he can just play it right over this pressing unit here. Goes long. Lo and behold, two centre-backs against two strikers. Your two full-backs push forward out of position. The ball is flicked on by Ivan Toney. And then you get Brian Mbeumo in this situation where he just easily gets a 1v1 against Meslier, the keeper. So what we're seeing is teams actually starting to exploit the way that Leeds play out of possession. But it's not just out of possession that the problems are coming, they're also coming in possession. So we've already talked about how Leeds like to play the ball along their back line, looking for these up, back and through passes. So they will look to find, for example, Harrison, play it into Rocker, and Rocker can play it forward into this dangerous area and generate chaos from there. And this whole approach relies on oppositions pushing forward and allowing space in behind it, generating this space in the central areas. What then happens if the opposition are just happy to allow Leeds possession? Because, as we've said, Leeds aren't necessarily looking to control possession to score. They fall back into a nice compact block like this, and then suddenly Leeds are in a different situation. They've got possession, they have to try and generate actual chances from build-up play. So now in this situation, the opposition have dropped deep, and Leeds have to now build up, generate these chances themselves. And that's not something that they're set up to do. And so a lot of teams are recognising this. They can sit deep against Leeds, absorb pressure, play it over the press, and generate all these problems for Leeds. And teams aren't just coming to this recognition before games, they're also coming to this recognition during games. So I've got here a expected goals plot from the Crystal Palace game against Leeds. Now what happens is that as time goes by, you've got the time on the bottom here as the game's going on. As the lines jump up, that's big chances generated by expected goals. So the big chance here that results in a goal, Palace have a goal here as well. And as we can see, Leeds create two very big chances in the first 20 minutes, but then they struggle to generate anything from there on in. The reason why Crystal Palace have done so badly in this half is that they tried to build up, they tried to go through Leeds' press, and it just simply didn't work. So it gets to half time, Patrick Vieira, their manager, starts making them play more direct, as we've seen, and suddenly Leeds is not generating anything, and Crystal Palace slowly start picking up more and more chances. And by the end of the game, the expected goals values are much, much closer. So Crystal Palace were able to actually exploit Leeds' weakness during a game and turn it around from a 1-0 loss to a 2-1 win. But there is an elephant in the room here, and that is this. If you actually look at the underlying numbers, on face value, it looks as though Leeds are doing okay. So we've got here the expected goal difference per 90 minutes for the Premier League this season. Teams at the top that you would expect, teams at the bottom that you might not expect actually, but a lot of the teams that you would expect to go down in this lower part of the table. And then we've got Leeds bang in the middle, pretty much on zero, so you're putting up as much expected goals as you are conceding expected goals. And as you see, this is mid-table. You would expect Leeds, on the basis of their underlying numbers, to be doing better than they are. So there is a group of people who are saying, well, if you just wait for Leeds to ride the variance, things will start going well for them in the end. And there's an element to which that is true, but I think there's something more to the story if we dig into the numbers a little bit more. So I have been able to use an app which is generated by a guy called Hugh Klein. It's a really useful resource called Macro Football. And what that does is it allows you to look at game state when you're analysing teams' expected goals creation. And what we mean by game state is anything that can influence a game and make teams play in different ways. So a really good example of a different game state might be a team going down to 10 men. We all know that if a team goes down to 10 men, it changes the game a lot. It can inflate the numbers of the team with 11 players and reduce the numbers of the team with 10 players. And the game state that we're interested in for Leeds this season is the scoreline. So what we can do is we can take each of the different score lines that Leeds will be. So at the top here, even, so if Leeds are drawing. If Leeds are a goal up, 2 goals up, 3 goals up, or a goal down and 2 goals down. And then we can have a look at the underlying numbers in those game states. There's a few different things to notice. The first one is that when Leeds are in an even game state, when they're drawing, in terms of the expected goals numbers we have here, and all these numbers are per 90, so keep that in mind. Per 90, Leeds generate an expected goal difference of minus 0.38, which is the 17th worst expected goal difference in this game state across the league. So when Leeds are drawing, which they spend the majority of their time doing incidentally, they are one of the worst teams in the league. Now there are some areas where Leeds are quite good. It's worth having a look at those. One of them is here, when Leeds are a goal up. Worth noticing they've only been a goal up for 71 minutes, so they've only been in that game state a little time. And in that game state, they've generated a lot more expected goals than they have against, so they look quite good there. It is worth noting as well though, that in this situation, yes, they're generating a lot of expected goals per 90, but they're also conceding a lot of expected goals per 90 too. And this may come from the fact that Leeds, just their play style is chaotic. They are generating chaotic game states. So sometimes that works out for them, they generate chances. Other times it doesn't and they concede chances. So that's +1, very little time. When they drop into +2 or +3, those numbers become negative, so they're doing quite badly there. The other one to look at is when they are a goal down. When they're a goal down, they're pretty much balancing their expected goal difference, so they're not better or worse. And then when they're 2 goals down, this is when they're at their most dangerous. And that makes a certain degree of sense, because if you're 2 goals down, the opposition will probably sit back, look to ride out the game and give Leeds more of the possession and allow them to get forward more. But it's not just the game state that's giving a slightly different story here. Actually, if we look at big chances, something else shows up too. Now, big chances, any chance that is greater than or equal to 0.3 expected goals. So that's a chance that you would expect to score in around 1 in 3. And if we look at all of the teams in the Premier League ranked against the amount of big chances they've conceded, we can see that Leeds here are in the top 3, so they are conceding a lot of bigger chances. And if we look at some of the examples of this on the board, I've just got 4 chances here that Leeds have conceded that come from those really high value XG moments. So here, Southampton versus Leeds, Joe Aribo gets the ball around the penalty spot. He is unchallenged by anyone. He's just got 1v1 against the keeper and unsurprisingly scores from that situation. Leicester City managed to work the ball down one side, play it across to the other. Leeds get dragged across. Harvey Barnes has a nice curling shot into the bottom corner. There's 2 chances for Fulham from the weekend. This is the first one. Bobby Cordova-Reid, you can't really see it here, but he's heading the ball here. The ball has come out wide from after a corner and the ball's played in. He's unmarked, he's able to get a free header. And again, in that game, Willian manages to get the ball is played across the byline, Leeds pull across, the area in front of the goal is kept open and Willian has this tap in into essentially an empty net. So we're seeing these situations that Leeds are maybe not conceding huge amounts of expected goals against, but when they are, there's a lot of big chances that you would expect teams to score more often than not, and this seems to be the problem. So if you dig into the underlying numbers a little bit more, a slightly different picture emerges, which suggests that rather than Leeds being a comfortable mid-table team, they may be in a little bit of trouble this season. So Jesse Marsch has problems in the Premier League, and the majority of these problems come from the play style. There's a sense in which his play style hasn't worked in the Premier League, and as a result of that, Leeds aren't able to be as dangerous as they might want to be. The big question is, will the numbers sort themselves out and Leeds finish in the mid-table, or is this play style doomed from the off and Leeds will be in a relegation battle for the rest of the season?
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic brings you the best sports journalism in the world in a personalised experience, connecting you with the stories and teams that you care about the most. There's coverage of 13 sports, plus direct access to world-class journalists through live Q&As, discussions and podcasts. And you can try it now for free for 30 days by clicking the link in the description.